I processed 611 bonded persons through the tallow yard before I understood what the stamp in my hand actually did. The yard sat where the border road forked toward the interior, a low gray compound of holding sheds and chain-link runs, built to sort anyone who arrived with a companion creature attached to them, the way some people arrive with a scar. Ward. If the bond was small and the person was a minor. Asset. If the tribunal's assessors decided the bond was strong enough to be useful in the war. Nobody asked the children which one they wanted to be. I sat at a table just inside the gate with a ledger, 2 stamps, and no authority whatsoever to decide anything. That was the assessor's job, up the hill, behind glass. My job was only to write down what they told me. For the first 4 months I wrote down what they told me. Then a boy of maybe 9 came through with a creature like a folded paper crane grown warm and breathing, and the assessor on duty, a tired man named Ostrander who hated the whole arrangement as much as I did but had a family to feed, told me to mark the boy asset because the crane thing's wingspan tested strong on the gauge. I looked at the boy. He was shaking so hard his teeth clicked. I stamped him Ward and told Ostrander the gauge had glitched, and Ostrander, who was tired in the particular way of a man choosing not to see something, said nothing at all. After that I kept a second seal in my coat, one I'd carved myself from a scrap of hardwood, close enough to the official mark that no one up the hill ever checked twice. I used it on any child whose bond wasn't obviously built for killing. 6 months of it, by the time Elira came through the gate. She came in with 11 children roped loosely to a transport line, and she was not roped to anything. She walked like a woman used to being watched and had decided a long time ago not to flinch at it. Dark hair threaded through with gray at the temple, though she couldn't have been much past 30. Storm blue eyes with a vertical cast to the pupil, the kind the assessor's gauges liked least, because it meant her bond ran deep enough to read on every instrument they owned. She had no creature visible. That was its own kind of tell. Ashvale, the transport officer said to me, like the name should mean something, and shoved a data slate across the table. Confirmed line air, strongest read we've taken all year. She goes to processing 2, not the children's shed. Processing 2 was where they sent assets waiting for conscription orders. I looked at Elira. She looked back at me with the flat patience of someone who had been looked at by men with stamps her whole life, and had stopped expecting anything from it. The children first, she said, not a request. They haven't eaten since the crossing. I fed the children first. It wasn't kindness, particularly, not yet. It was procedure, and procedure gave me an excuse to make the transport officer wait. But I noticed, while I ladled out the thin-grained stew, that she counted heads before she'd let herself sit down, the way I'd seen exactly one other person do in 6 months at that gate. Myself, at shift change, counting my own stamped wards to make sure none of them had been quietly moved. I marked her asset that first day. I had no seal that reached that high, no authority that touched a line air. I told myself that, and it didn't make the ledger feel any lighter in my hands. She stayed 6 months in processing 2, waiting on a conscription order that kept getting delayed by paperwork I may or may not have had a hand in slowing. In that time I learned her name properly, not the tribunal's shorthand, Ashvale, line air, asset 14, but Elira, which she told me herself, flatly, the 3rd week, watching to see what I'd do with it. I did nothing dramatic with it, I just used it. Good morning, Elira. The grain's better today, Elira. I brought her books from the depot's condemned paper bin, because I'd noticed she read anything, and I found her, twice, quietly teaching the 11 children their letters in the dead hour between meals, because nobody else at that depot thought a weapon needed to know how to read. The children called her something I never learned to translate exactly. She never corrected them. The thing that finally moved her, she told me much later, wasn't the books. It was the day a new assessor tried to confiscate the Crane Boy's bond creature outright, not reclassify him, take the creature, hand it to the War Council's breeding program as raw material, and leave the boy with nothing. I didn't have rank for that fight. I had a ledger, a forged seal, and 6 months of practice at making paperwork move slower than men. I told the assessor the confiscation order was missing a countersignature it did in fact need, and I would need to walk it up the hill myself before anything left the yard. It took 4 hours. By the time I came back with the missing signature, mine, written in a hand that wasn't quite mine, the shift had changed, and the new officer on duty didn't know or care to reopen a closed order. Elira found me afterward, behind the feed shed, and didn't say thank you. She said, "You have no authority to do any of that." "No," I agreed. "Then why?" "Because nobody asked him what he wanted to keep," I said. "And somebody should have to answer for that, even if it's only me, even if all I've got is a stamp I whittled out of a fence post." She looked at me for a long moment with those storm blue eyes, and something in her face, not softness, not yet, but the wary defiance easing half a degree towards something that could, given time, become trust, settled. "They're going to conscript me," she said. "The order's coming. My bond test's too strong for them to keep delaying forever." "I know. You can't forge a line heir's conscription order the way you forge a 9-year-old's confiscation notice." "No," I said again, "but I can be standing at the gate when it comes through." She didn't ask why that mattered. I think, by then, she already knew. The order came on a gray morning 3 weeks later, a full tribunal escort instead of the usual single officer, because someone up the hill had finally noticed how many clerical delays had accumulated around a line heir asset, and decided to close the file personally. They came for the whole block, a lira, and, on new wartime authority, every bonded minor I'd spent half a year quietly reclassifying, the order now broad enough to sweep them all back into asset status at once. I met them at the gate with the ledger open. "These 11 are processed and released," I said, and turned it so the lead officer could see 6 months of ward stamps, real and false so thoroughly mixed by then, that I couldn't have told you myself which was which. "Signed, sealed, filed. You'll find no open orders on any child in this block." "The heir isn't a child," he said. "No," Alira said, stepping past me before I could answer for her, and it was the first time I'd heard her raise her voice above the flat, careful register she used for men with stamps. "But I am released, on my own recognizance, as of this morning, because the only person in this depot who ever asked my name before he asked my classification has already written it down. If you want to overturn that, you'll do it in front of these children, and you'll do it to my face." The officer looked at me. I had no rank that mattered, no authority that reached above a border clerk's table. Nothing behind me but a ledger and a whittled seal and 6 months of small, illegal kindnesses. But the paperwork was clean, the delay was documented, and somewhere up that hill was a war council with far larger fires to put out than one clerk's stubborn honesty. He signed the release himself, mostly, I think, to be rid of the problem before it grew a name in someone else's report. The gate opened. It was an ordinary gate, chain link, rust at the hinges, nothing that belonged in the stories children tell about crowns and cages. Alira walked the 11 children through it herself, counting heads one last time, and then she stopped at my side of the line, and did not walk any farther. "You could have let the order stand," she said. "No one would have blamed a clerk for following it." "I know," I said. I didn't want to be the kind of man who could. She reached out, not for my hand, not yet, just close enough that I understood the distance was a choice, and one she was making on purpose, and said, "Then walk with us. There's a whole world past this fence that never learned to sort people by what they're worth in a war." I did,